Hey, Sean, how are you doing way over there in Australia?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Good. It's morning here, and it's obviously evening there, isn't it?
Yes, I'm out here on my porch on a nice autumn evening.
Excellent. And we're going to talk about what it's like to be a Mormon missionary from A to Z,
Yeah.
which I know a lot of people have interest in because we see Mormon missionaries are obviously in the street and coming to our doors quite a bit. But a lot of people wonder, well, where do they live? What, why were they selected to come to this country? I mean, do they have to report to anyone? What is it
Mhm.
like being away from home? So you've been through all that, haven't you, Sean?
That's right. So I was a missionary from 2007 March to 2009 March.
Hmm.
I worked in England, so that's where you are. I worked in Manchester and those surrounding areas, Liverpool, uh, Birmingham, that kind of area. So yes, definitely have a lot to talk about. Of course, some of my information is slightly dated since that was 10 years ago, but still the general idea will be very much the same.
Right. Okay. So when you're about, I suppose, 18 years old, and you're obviously part of the Mormon Church, there comes a point when you are pretty much expected to do missionary work. Am I right?
Yeah, so yeah, let's maybe talk absolutely about that, what the culture is around being a missionary for people growing up in the Mormon church. So, as you mentioned, yes, I grew up in the LDS church. I grew up in South Africa. Both of my parents were Mormons. I might mention briefly that you and I have another interview on your channel in case people want to go there. I think I speak a bit about that then. But the culture is for so-called active Mormons, people who are engaged and coming to church, that kind of thing, is that for young men, it is expected that they go on a mission. And for young women, there's not an obligation. It's not the same kind of pressure as on a young man, but still, it's a nice to have, and many young Mormon girls choose to go. So that might answer one of the first questions that people would have about missionaries is why sometimes are there girls and guys, and how come there are guys more often? Well, the reason is that growing up, guys are expected to go where girls
Mm.
are not expected to go.
Yeah. And is it a case of your leader, which I think is called your bishop, will at one point they will expect you to come to their office, and then they'll tell you where in the world that you're going to go. Is that true?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll describe the process. So the first thing is that, I mean, most often if you're growing up and you're active Mormon, your bishop, which is like a priest in a Catholic church, they will know you personally and they will have worked with you as a youth for a long time. So by the time, mission age comes, it's not really the case of they pull you in one day and say, hey, it would be nice if you go and be a missionary. Most often they knew you since you were 6 years old or whatever,
Hmm.
and they knew this day was coming, and you all knew and expected that you would one day be a missionary. So it's kind of something that was established for quite a long time. In terms of the application process, which you're talking about, how does someone apply to be a missionary, and how are they assigned to a location? So there are a set of papers called mission papers, and you fill out these papers, and they include a lot of information about you, about your language skill, about your hobbies, about all sorts of different things, including immunizations. You need to be immunized, your health and your mental health, these kinds of things. And you'll fill all of these in, and you'll send them to Salt Lake City, which is the head office of the church. And so they are centrally processed, all of the missionary applications of the church,
Hmm.
and they're processed by the 12 Mormon apostles. So they're really, it's not actually done by the local bishop at all. And the people right at the top will look at every single application, and there are actually sort of accounts that they give where they believe they are obviously inspired by the Holy Spirit to tell you where you're going to go. So they will look at your photo, and in my case, my surname is Powery, so they'll say, "Okay, Elder Powery, where are you going to go?" And then they'll, I mean, for people who are atheists, who are secular and skeptical, really it is like dart throwing. But
Yeah.
for someone who's religious, they kind of feel like, okay, the Holy Spirit's going to tell me where you're going to go, and I'll feel it, and it'll be right. So basically, that's how you're assigned to a location, um, and you receive your mission papers back from headquarters. And the opening of the mission papers in Mormon culture is actually a significant event in a young man's life. So usually, when the mission papers have come back from headquarters, your family and friends will gather around. You'll actually have sort of a party or a celebration, and you'll all be in your house, and you will open the letter, and it'll say, dear Elder Powery, you have been called to be a missionary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you'll be assigned to serve in the X region.
And that's the
And
first time you find out.
That's correct. And in those papers, it also tells you the day that you should report to the missionary training center. So, and which missionary training center in the world you should report to. So the church does arrange the flights from wherever you are to where you need to be. But you have to obviously coordinate that with the local church offices. And yeah, so for example, in my case, I happened to be in Cape Town in South Africa on the day. I was actually out on a boat at the time with my family, just having fun. And I received a phone call, and I had to give someone permission to open my papers. So it's such a sacred event to open these mission papers. So I gave someone permission over the phone. You can open my papers, and they read out. I didn't have a party like I described because the timing wasn't right. But yeah, they read out, you will serve in the England Manchester mission. In my case,
this is a big deal to a Mormon family, isn't it? That this letter arrives and that you're actually going, and you hopefully are going to save some souls.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, it's a massive cultural event. You think of, say, the Unification Church. You think of, say, their mass weddings. Where lots of people get married all together at the same time. I compare it to that kind of thing. It's just the cultural significance is huge for young Mormon families. It's a moment of great pride when your son has grown out of high school and they've received their mission call, which is what it's called, and they tell their family and friends. It's a big thing. You communicate to everyone where you're going. They'll wish you luck, that kind of thing.
Now, how about if you or anyone else had decided, no, I don't want to do this? Like, just say from the very beginning they didn't want to do that. Would that be okay? Or imagine they did agree to it, got their papers, saw they were being sent to Outer Mongolia, and said, no, I don't think I want to do this. What happened?
Yeah, so you actually need to give a written response to your calling. So you at the bottom of the papers explained you have to write back, and you have to say, I accept this, and you have to agree with that you're going. So you can reject a calling. I've never known of someone rejecting a calling when they see where they're going, because going back to context, young Mormons believe this calling has come from the prophets of God or the apostles of God. So apostles tell you to go to Outer Mongolia, and you're like, where God wants me to go, that's where I'm going to go.
And then you have to learn the Outer Mongolian language, don't you?
That's right, yes. Yeah. And actually, that's a good segue into the next topic. So usually when you receive a mission call, it's not going to be a long time before you become a missionary. So you're talking maximum 3 months you'll wait. So for me, it was about 3 months just due to the timing. And if you're going to learn a new language, they'll send you to the big missionary training center. From now on, I'll just say MTC because that's the abbreviation. There's a massive missionary training center, MTC, in Provo, Utah, which is quite famous. And it has, as far as I understand, thousands of missionaries in it at any given time. And so they'll fly you to that MTC, and they'll train you in the language in an immersion course for 3 months. So they'll really just drop you into that language, basically.
That is not very long to learn possibly a really difficult language. What if it was like Chinese or something really difficult?
Yeah, but interestingly enough, yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, in Mormon culture, there's this idea of the gift of tongues, which has sort of been watered down, the original gift of tongues was speaking in kind of gibberish and having powerful religious experience with it. The modern Mormon version of gift of tongues is you can learn a language quickly. Yes, that has changed over time. So basically, if you learn it really well and you're really clever, blah blah blah, people say you're gifted. Maybe you have a gift of the Spirit. You have the gift of tongues.
I see.
So I didn't go to the Provo MTC because I grew up in South Africa speaking English, and I was going to England, so I didn't need to learn a language. I just needed to learn how to be a missionary. So in that case, I went to a much more local MTC, which is actually in England. It's located up there. I'm assuming you know Preston.
Yes.
Near Preston, there's a small town called Chorley.
This is Lancashire, I think.
If I remember my names right, yes.
Well, northwest anyway.
Yes, yeah, north of Manchester. Yeah, Chorley, you can just search it. Now, in Chorley, there's a massive complex owned by the LDS Church, and it has a really big, beautiful temple, and then it has a chapel, and then it has huge gardens, and then some administration buildings, and then the MTC, which is on the one side.
I think that's the second. There's two temples in England. I think one of them is the one you're describing. The other one is down south in
London. Yeah, London South. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. So yes, I was 19, just over 19 years old, and I hopped on a plane from Johannesburg, South Africa, and flew to first to London and then to Manchester, and I got picked up and taken to the MTC there. So the MTC for a person not learning a language is a 2-week course. So 2 or 3 weeks, I don't remember exactly. But yes, it's very brief. And so, yeah, I'll describe how it started. Basically, on the first day or so, you're not doing anything because all of the missionaries are arriving from various countries. Some of them are still severely jet lagged because they've come from the US. So basically, first day is just, get your stuff down and take a nap, that kind of thing. But literally from second day onwards, you begin, and it's you start to live the missionary schedule. So wake up at 6:30 in the morning, you exercise for half an hour. So we used to go out running. It was sort of coming up on spring when I was there, so it was still pretty cold. You're out 6:30 in the morning running around. Then you have between 7 and 8 is breakfast and shower. And from 8 o'clock onwards, the whole day, we're talking well into the evening, 6, 7 p.m., you're doing training. So you're going to various courses. There are MTC teachers. MTC teachers are actually paid Mormon people who are ex-missionaries. They used to be missionaries. And they train missionaries how to do missionary work. And it ranges from everything from finding is the word we use for going out and trying to find people to teach. And so it ranges from everything from finding to teaching to living a missionary life. And there's a lot of so-called spiritual preparation as well, talking about your calling and how sacred this time is, and this is your consecrated period of time for your life, that kind of thing. So the training is quite extensive. They also have visiting authorities who will come around and give presentations, that kind of thing. But yes, to answer your basic question, what's it like in the MTC? Basically, you're in classes all day, every day, with short breaks in between. There are some periods of unstructured time where you're allowed to basically do what you want within the mission rules, which is basically nothing. Like you just sit there writing in your journal or reading, the scriptures, that kind of thing.
So how much is, when you're in the MTC, how much is spiritual that you're learning, and how much is practical about the country you're going to, in terms of not just learning the language, but perhaps some of the local customs, or how they might react to a couple of missionaries? What do they feel about other religions? Does that come into it at all?
That's a good question. I actually think the Mormon Church has a long way to grow in terms of caring for and understanding foreign cultures. I genuinely think they don't understand other cultures as well as they could or should, perhaps. Now, to be fair, when I was in England, the Mormon Church has a long history in England, so I did learn quite a bit about that. I learned, but really, what you're given is sort of Mormonism and England history. You're not given what are British people like. You're given what's the history of Mormonism in Britain. So it's not really. I mean, I got a little bit of training about British people, but not much. It's basically just dump you on their doorsteps, and that's how you get to know them.
Well, before we talk about what it's like actually having to move to another country and living there for the 2 years, what happens in terms of what you leave behind? Obviously, you leave your family behind, and there'll be a lot of homesickness. But did you have like a girlfriend at the time, if you were like 18, 19, and perhaps you did? And then what happens?
That's a good question. So, firstly, coming back to pre-mission culture, you're encouraged to not have a girlfriend before you become a missionary. Like you're encouraged to not have any attachments so that you can go out. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, but I think it's a general cultural encouragement. In my case, I did actually have a girlfriend, and we had dated for about a year and 3 months before I became a missionary. And she was actually, when we started dating, she was not a Mormon, and she became a Mormon while we were dating. So she was actually a convert, and in a sense, not entirely me, but partially my convert, someone I helped to bring in. So yes, but you're generally encouraged not to have a girlfriend or attachments like that. In my case, we can get to that in a bit, but in my case, I did actually break up with her in the early times of my mission. We can talk about that in a second. But yeah, I'd say about 50% of missionaries that I knew had girlfriends or boyfriends back home. So even though it's encouraged, I mean, to be fair, you're in high school. Who doesn't have girlfriends and boyfriends in high school, right? It's extremely common.
Wow. And then, of course, you're in the MTC. And I think you told me at some point before when we were talking about this is they feed you quite well while you're there.
That's exactly right. So one of the most positive things to say about the MTC is the food. They have a cafeteria. In the case in Chorley, downstairs cafeteria next to a lake, really beautiful lake outside. So you come by there. They have these, the soda machine dispensers that you have at Hungry Jack's or Subway. Oh, sorry, I'm Hungry Jack's is an Australian thing. Subway.
I know Subway. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. So you can walk in there anytime, take some glass and get yourself some soda. The meals are exquisite. The food is exquisite. They have a full-time professional chef there and groups.
You know what this reminds me of? It's like before somebody is sacrificed, they give them this smorgasbord of food and fatten them up, before the slaughter sort of thing. I'm sorry. That's just the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. I have a different interpretation, although that's a really good one. My interpretation is to alleviate homesickness and how difficult the beginning of the journey is. From what I remember, it wasn't the case in my MTC, but I've heard stories of the Provo one where there's just ice cream of all flavors available for anyone to grab at any time. So I think there is this element of kids are homesick and you feed them really well to help them cope with it. I think that's more of a real factor.
And perhaps, forgive me if I'm being cynical here, maybe also if word of this gets out, it'll encourage other people to become missionaries and say, oh, I can't wait to get to the MTC because there's ice cream and Coca-Cola on tap. Well, maybe not Coca-Cola, right. But...
Yeah. Give up 2 years of your life for a bit of ice cream. Yeah.
No bribery
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, and no Coke. That's interesting that you point that out. That is another Mormon cultural thing. Well picked up, of course. No, there isn't Coke. There's Fanta and other things, but no Coke.
Because Coca-Cola's got caffeine in it, similar to tea and coffee, which is part of the word of wisdom. You shouldn't have these
Yeah.
things, according
But
to
somehow having
Joseph
12
Smith.
bars of chocolate is not against the word of wisdom.
Oh, well, there is some hope then.
Yeah. So yeah, just a summary of my MTC experience. Like, I mean, for this, to answer this is about context. So obviously, I mean, we've had a discussion before that, in our previous podcast, I've given a bit of my history that I'm not a Mormon anymore. I'm an ex-Mormon. But to look back at that time of my life, it's important to acknowledge the context of being fully immersed in the belief system. And so from that point of view, my MTC experience was very positive. I actually really enjoyed being in the MTC. I had some good experiences, met some good friends, that kind of thing. So, given the whole context of being a believing Mormon, I had a fantastic time. It was really good. It was actually when I first moved out of the MTC, that's when I sort of had a crash. We can talk about that now, I guess. So, yeah, and an additional thing about culture around girlfriends. So, later on, when I was a missionary, maybe out a year and a half, one of the apostles, one of the 12 apostles of the Mormon Church, came visiting our mission and gave presentations, and his wife spoke as well. And she was a very bubbly individual, very jovial. And she basically just said to all of the missionaries, she said, "Elders, break up with your girlfriends. Yeah, so that you can focus on the work." So basically, it was very explicit.
Just like
Just
that.
walking in there, yeah, just like that. Elders, break up with your girlfriends. So I had, of course, broken up with my girlfriend quite some time before, but at the time I was working with a missionary, my companion, who still had a girlfriend, and literally like the next day he went and he wrote her a letter and said, "We're breaking up." So, and he had been sort of hanging on by a thread, which often happens in those relationships, with her for over a year into his mission. So
Wow.
it was quite hurtful for her because she had just been sitting there waiting for him, waiting at home. Suddenly one day she gets a letter with no explanation, no context, just "we're breaking up." So that's the kind of culture. Generally speaking, like, I wouldn't say missionaries look down on other missionaries who have girlfriends, but it is sort of a thing. It's sort of expected that you shouldn't have attachments.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, that is. I hate to say it is part of the, as you know, part of the cult. The elements of a cult is attachments,
Sacrifice.
yeah, family, anyone who might draw you away from the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And as you're aware, many cults ask their members to sacrifice things. That's how the sort of mechanism of cognitive dissonance works. You give up something hard to give up for the organization, and in the process, you reason with yourself, "Well, I couldn't have been wasting my time, right? I couldn't have given that up for nothing, right?" And that's sort of how the mind turns those cogs and sort of gives you stronger belief, stronger conviction in what you're doing, because you've given up something and then you keep giving up more and more and more for that thing. So yes, absolutely.
You're okay. So just say you're in the field, as they say, you're knocking on doors, going up down the street. That first week must be very, very difficult. I mean, in terms of not just homesickness, but you must get fairly despondent.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd love to talk about my first week. So the first thing is MTC, as I said, with all the ice cream, is sort of like a high that you're put on in the beginning of your mission. They want you to have a great experience in your MTC.
Yeah.
So you're on this high, this spiritual, emotional high from the MTC, and then you're put into the field for the first time. And for me, that was literally a crash. So I like that you said first week. I have a very particular and personal memory. after I'd been out in the field for just 1 week, I remember we were repainting a bathroom for a school. We were doing service, community service, sitting there with our paintbrushes, and we're painting this bathroom. And I was literally on the verge of tears every single moment. It took all of my emotional energy and strength to keep myself from breaking down every single moment while I was busy painting that bathroom. So yeah, it was very, very difficult to be a brand new missionary. One of the first experiences I had was actually talking with someone on the street for the first time. So walking out of the flat, or the apartment, walking on the street, and me and my companion, my trainer, talking with someone for the first time. And I actually remember that I was really excited in that moment. That was one of the first initial experiences. I was like, yeah, I get to do this for 2 years. I get to talk to people. I was really, really pumped, really excited. But again, the crash came, absolutely. So, and more than just a week, I'd say it took me a good 7 or 8 weeks to settle into being a missionary. And I experienced severe depression for those first few weeks. Absolutely. Yeah, very, very difficult. So basically, in my first few weeks as a missionary, as I mentioned, I experienced quite a lot of depression. It was really difficult. We had just been assigned to a brand new area where missionaries hadn't been for a while. So it was just, you're building everything from scratch. And I remember after about 6 weeks, this is now where we come to the personal sort of difficult area about the girlfriend thing. So I had a girlfriend. We hadn't really been clear on what we were doing with our relationship going into my mission. We just hadn't really thought about it. I mean, we're 19. How much thought do people at age 19, put into their relationships and making them continuous and so on? So I don't really know what the expectation was between us, but we hadn't broken up yet. And my missionary trainer, who's actually a really good guy, I have to be honest, we're still friends to today. He actually sort of encouraged me to break up with her. It's half his encouragement, half me thinking it would be a good idea anyway, because I was being a missionary. And I've just described the culture of attachment to you. So yeah, I basically made the choice to dump my girlfriend, which I did. So, sent her an email saying we can't be together, blah, blah, blah. And it actually really broke her heart. You can imagine from her perspective, she's still at home, boyfriend, they've been dating for over a year, left, and after a few weeks, it's over. And I was actually pretty cold. So if I were to be honest, I'd say that's one of my regrets. It's just I mean, I don't know what else I could have done, but just being so cold and so robotic in the way that I broke up with her. Just, straightforwardly, it's over, please don't talk. I actually sort of asked her not to talk with me anymore because I wanted to focus on being a missionary. And, I look back at that now from my current perspective, and I feel like that was a completely unnecessary suffering created by that circumstance. It was just pointless to have so much pain in me and in her. I mean, the whole missionary thing is pointless from my perspective anyway. But just the culture around attachment and how much damage that does emotionally to people. I feel like it is a very hurtful thing for people.
And presumably it's not just you that this happens to. I hear that depression is quite common amongst Mormon missionaries. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. Although they won't tell you that, because there's a sort of culture of, the Lego movie. Everything is awesome. It's just kind of this positive Mormon energy, which the Book of Mormon musical managed to capture beautifully. So, early, I remember within the first week of my mission, I went out to another area on what's called an exchange, which is where you go for one day with another missionary. And I was walking around speaking with people, and even I myself, like I was almost emotionally collapsing every moment kind of thing. Of course, the way you deal with that in that context is you're praying a lot. You're like, God, please help me, help me make it through this hour, help me make it through this day. That kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely. I don't know if people could see it in me, but I could definitely feel it, and it was very difficult.
Okay.
To add if I may, to add another comment,
Hmm.
a lot of the pain. This is looking at Mormon missionary life from a cult perspective. A lot of the pain that missionaries experience in the early times of their mission is really replacing their identity with the image of the religion. So you have someone's normal identity, or whatever could be considered that person's authentic self. You go into the MTC, and basically it's like a reprogramming, like that is wiped, right? And the early times in mission, that is wiped. You can't read. I mean, we'll get to the rules in a few minutes, but you can't read anything outside of the approved list. You can't do anything else. You have to preach. And so a lot of the pain that missionaries experience, I personally believe, is their authentic personality being replaced with a cult personality, with something different. And that is a painful process. In Stephen Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control, he refers to this as unfreezing and freezing, where you take someone's personality and you treat it like a block of ice, and you unfreeze it so that it's malleable, and you shape it into something that you want, and then you refreeze it in that form. And so that's what happens as a missionary, as a young missionary. Your personality is taken, it's broken down, it's reshaped to be in the image of Mormonism, of the Mormon ideal, and then that reshaping is a painful process. Now, from the eyes of a Mormon, that is actually, from their perspective, they understand that process too, except for they think that is a sacred, a beautiful experience of surrendering your will to Jesus Christ, that kind of thing. But in actual fact, your personality is being eroded. Your authentic identity is being replaced by a cult identity.
Well, I'm sure part of that is like what you just mentioned, are the rules. And I know that when you are sent to another country, you are given a place to stay, an apartment or shared house, I think it is. And you have a mission leader, I think, is that right, who you don't live with, but he lives nearby, who you report to. And there's all kinds of things which you cannot do. And this is very difficult for young men, not just no internet. So can you talk a little bit about that and just what is allowed and what's not allowed?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, the rules that missionaries have to obey are quite extensive. There's actually a little book that's called the White Handbook, or White Booklet, that they keep in their pockets at all times. So if you approach a mission, you can actually ask them, and they will show you.
I
And
will remember that.
it has a little certificate on it that certifies them as an official representative of the church. And within the book, it speaks about all the rules. And we were required to read a portion of that book every single day. And I read that book many, many times over as a missionary. And basically, this book, as I said, it outlines the rules. So let's start with the basics. There's a schedule: 6:30 a.m. Wake up, exercise for half an hour, get ready, and from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. you're studying scriptures, Bible, Book of Mormon, so on, and Preach My Gospel, which is a manual for missionary service. Then from 10 a.m. till 9 p.m. you're out the whole day. You're preaching. So it's quite a long day. You have 1 hour break for lunch and dinner. And then at 9 p.m. you return home. You plan for the next day from 9 to 9:30. You're just doing your planning, what you're going to do with your time. And then from 9:30 to 10:30, that's basically your only personal time. And you're supposed to write in your journal. So you're supposed to record what happened that day and prepare to go to bed. So if you look at that schedule, you don't have time to do anything else. But in terms of what you're not allowed to do, firstly, you have to maintain eye contact with your companion. That's the person you're working with at all times, except for when they're in the bathroom. You're not allowed to read anything outside of the prescribed list, which is the Mormon scriptures, Preach My Gospel, the manual I mentioned, and a couple of other approved books. So you can't read the newspapers, you can't go online, nothing like that. You can't have a personal phone. One missionary companionship will have one mobile phone. That's it. but your companion always has to be able to hear you on the phone. So if you're on the phone talking to someone, you can't just have a private conversation. In fact, you can never have a private conversation, really. You aren't allowed to contact your family and friends except for via letter, and you're encouraged to only do that on one day of the week, which is called Preparation Day or P Day. And on that day, the schedule is the same all the way till 10 a.m., but from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m., you can actually go do your laundry, and you can clean your house, and you can go do some emails and grocery shopping. So basically, it's more than a full-time job. You're doing it all the time, and you have no access to the internet, no access to sort of any outside thoughts, except for the people that you meet, of course, any outside ideas.
I will see them using iPads, but I'm assuming that they're not connected to anything other than perhaps LDS.org.
Probably. That was after my time. Yeah. iPads were something that we were dreaming about back then, but it's new now. Yeah.
And did you say they have to keep eye contact with their companion all the time?
You don't have to be watching them, but you have to be within eyesight. Sorry.
Within eyesight. Okay. I was going to say that's a bit extreme.
Sorry, I probably said that wrong. Yeah, eye contact. Yeah. That's all right. I think I said that wrong. You have to be within eyesight all the time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
It's so suffocating, though. But I assume that you just take it on the chin because this is what you do.
Absolutely. Let me just see if I made any notes. So you can only call your family twice a year, Mother's Day and Christmas Day. So you can email them once a week. You can send them letters any day, but people don't really write letters. You can't use any external email service, like you can't use Gmail or Hotmail. You actually use a church filtered email service. So I don't know what kind of email monitoring they do. I really don't. But it is filtered. Like, it probably blocks things like any literature that's considered anti-Mormon. Let's see. And yeah, that's a high level summary, I guess, of the rules. Just one last rule: you can only listen to certain types of music. So it has to be the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and there are some other prescribed music, but you can't just listen to rock music or whatever you want to listen to. You have to listen to that music only.
Okay, Shawn, thank you very much for telling us, you're giving us some insights there into becoming a Mormon missionary and everything that goes on there. And we're going to continue this in part 2, when we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty and interesting experiences and even some harassment you experienced when on your mission. So we'll see you back here for part 2.
Thanks so much, Mark.